welcome to the London Property Panel, and welcome to Greenwich Peninsula.
So firstly, thank you, KP and Sonny, for having me. Really appreciate it. My name's Tej. I invest in property in South Wales, and I live in London. I have a podcast called Tej Talks. So if you're not listening, go and have a listen to it. It was ranked number 15 on iTunes, and we've had 120,000 listens in the past 12 months in over 90 countries. So maybe people in Oman are listening to it as well. So I'm here to introduce everyone and host this panel. So I'm going to start with Andrew. Andrew Ludderman is the commercial director at Night Dragon. Andrew joined Night Dragon in 2017 and was appointed to oversee the commercial deals at the 8.4 billion redevelopment of the Greenwich Peninsula. Prior to working at Night Dragon, Andrew worked for Capital & Counties for almost 4 years and spent 2.5 years as a director at JLL. So welcome. Next, I'm going to go to Philip. Philip Eastwood is a partner and head of London at The Buying Solution. So Philip has worked in the prime property market for over 30 years. He started his career in a boutique agency in Chelsea. And prior to joining TBS in January 2015, Philip worked for Knight Frank for 15 years in the Notting Hill office, having previously worked for another international agent in Knightsbridge and Kensington. He's very experienced. And Michael Inane, partner at Allsop. So Michael joined Allsop in 1997, and has worked in teams across the residential division. He spent 2 years in residential valuations and 14 years in residential auctions, helping to set up Allsop in Ireland. Towards the end of his period, he's now a partner in residential investments and developments. Last but not least, Mohammed Zaghloul. Say it correctly? Perfect. Mohammed joined Sotheby's International Realty in February 2018 after studying for his master's degree in real estate at the Cass Business School. Mohammed spent 2 years working at the Middle East desk for Harrods Estates and 5 months at Foxtons. So what a wonderful and experienced panel we have tonight, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll go straight into the first question, if that's okay with everyone. Sure. So something's been in the news lately, some sort of this little thing about, is it leaving the European Union, something? Brexit? So, on the topic of that, Andrew, did you have a little drinking game for us to...
I was going to suggest, actually, every time Brexit is mentioned in this room, they have to finish their glass of champagne.
Everybody is going to be drunk. So, taking that into consideration, and this is a question for everyone, how is the current political situation and ongoing market uncertainty affecting the London property market? Who wants to go first?
I'll take it. Uncertainty, I think that's the killer. We call it the Brexcuse. So, day to day, it gets raised as a reason not to do something, rather than obviously the positivity that we require to get on with it and do deals. So uncertainty is the killer, and that's what's causing us problems. There are other issues as well, but the market is difficult. But obviously, uncertainty is the main driver for that.
Okay. Anyone else want to?
Yep.
Go ahead.
I'd actually like to add that we started seeing a slowdown in transactions actually pre-Brexit in 2016 once the stamp duty threshold increased. Brexit has indeed created uncertainty in the market. Having said that, the family offices, investors and buyers that we work with look at Brexit as a window of opportunity. You look at sterling relative to US dollar or any US dollar denominated currency, and this is a window where it's a buyer's market essentially. We look at the geopolitical global situation. Our Hong Kong referrals have quadrupled in the last 2 months. Our website traffic from Hong Kong increased 40%. We look at the Middle East, what used to be one of the safest patches, the GCC specifically, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE 7 or 8 years ago, was one of the safest patches on earth. It's a matchbox right now waiting to ignite. So we take a step back and we look at what's happening around the world, and Brexit looks like a hurdle that we'll hopefully overcome.
Okay, I like that answer.
I mean, they always say uncertainty is the antipathy to any investment decision you're ever likely to make. But Brexit is a kind of hurdle that we will get over in London. London will never not be a world city, the same way as New York, Hong Kong, and all the other world cities will always be world cities. So I think your excuse, the Brexcuse, is a very good one.
Yeah.
You know, the underlying market dynamics of London will be there. And using Brexit as an excuse not to make a decision, I think is, you know, if we wait for certainty in a market, you'll never make a decision. There's always uncertainty in markets. That's why we're investment professionals and, not betting on a sure thing. So it is.
I mean, have you noticed with your clients and with your investors that they are sort of taking a step back, or are they still kind of going for it?
Listen, the reason I don't think people are making investment decisions right now is because they're not sure whether the market's going to drop a bit further. And you want to get on the market at the right time, on the way up, basically. So I don't think they necessarily go away. I think, the dynamics of London and Greenwich or, whichever market you're investing in London is always going to be there. It's just when people get onto that curve.
Okay, that makes sense.
I work on the acquisition side, on the buy side. And what's interesting is that if you're looking from the seller, for a lot of sellers, the reluctance to sell. A number of people say, great, pound is an all-time low. One of the difficulties is if you're a European vendor, you've taken a hit on your property price, and you've also taken a hit on your currency. So for a lot of vendors, there's a huge reluctance to put your property on the market. So what we're finding in prime central London is ironically a shortage of property, new property coming to the market. And that is probably stalling the market because a lot of buyers come into the market, and there's very little of them to buy.
And do you think that that's then pushing up the prices in London, which is maybe going against what most people think Brexit is going to do?
I mean, I think there is discounts. There are discounts to be had. But what you have to understand is prime central London is still getting big ticket prices. I think there's not a lot of capital. You just look around London, there's a lot of capital, a lot of investment in London. If you're fortunate to buy a property in 2005, 2010, you're sitting a lot of equity. You might not even have a mortgage. If somebody comes to you and says, I'll give you 30% off, you go, no thanks, I'll hold out, I'll stick out.
And I guess a sort of semi-question for all of you, do you think that Brexit has changed what people think of London? Or, as you said, Andrew, are they just still seeing it as just another hurdle?
Difficult one because I'm not looking at London in that respect. I don't think I think investors are savvy enough to understand that the London market goes beyond the kind of short-term politics and things like that. We live in a political cycle that kind of has a 4-year horizon at best. But Brexit, listen, love it or loathe it, it was a decision that the country made, and we've got to live by that. I don't think in terms of perception of the UK, it has a particularly negative impact, albeit they are looking at us trying to say, let's get it sorted out.
Okay.
I think there's a hell of a lot of money out there, and we're experiencing funds from America, Australia, the Far East. They're mad out to still buy property in the UK. So it is a temporary blip, and I think that's not lost on canny investors in whatever way, shape or form they are, wherever they're located in the world. So the demand is definitely there. It's just a timing as to when do you jump in, as Andrew rightly said, is it going to dip a little bit more? But I think fundamentally, if they can get the yields that they're looking for, specifically with residential, whether that's in London or the wider UK, they'll jump in and get on with it.
Okay, makes sense. Did you?
Absolutely. Well, the London residential market with the investors that we deal with is a long-term play. It's built on wealth preservation. No one wakes up for 2 to 3% yields. The family offices that we work with have children that go to university and school in London and will continue to go to school in London. We have some of the best education system. Brexit's not going to change that. We have one of the most respected judicial systems in the world. Without getting into politics, we saw that before yesterday with the Supreme Court verdict. No one's above the law. And that's what makes the UK and London one of the most desirable cities in the world to live in.
Fantastic. So my next question is, where and what are the opportunities for those looking to invest in London? So this is not necessarily where in London, but maybe where in the market. Who wants to start me off? I'm going to pick someone. Philip?
Buy best in class. I mean, I think the fundamentals are, don't always be governed by the discount. Question, is it a discount? Also look at rarity. Can it be replicated? You know, Grosvenor Square, it can't be replicated. It's getting record prices. Prime central London, a lot of it cannot be replicated. Buy best in class. Also, when looking for a development, when I look for buyers, especially overseas buyers, it's very important to look at the infrastructure surrounding the property. You know, does it have good shops? Is it good for transport? Are there local schools? It's all very well buying a big glass tower somewhere, but if you walk out and you can't, for the love of money, buy a pint of milk, do you want to live there? Because when you come to resell it, the question is, it's not a nice area. The infrastructures are not there. And I think the crucial thing is, when I certainly look at property, is to look holistically. Look at the property. Does it have unique qualities? Can that be matched elsewhere? And also, is it a nice area? Would I live here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's a difficult question to answer because when you say invest in London, you know, what's your investment terms? You know, are you looking for a 2-year play, a 5-year play, or a 20, 50-year play? So, you know, everyone's got their different investment requirements to invest in any product, be that property, be that cities, or anything else. But I think that the point's well made that you need to look just beyond the location of a property. You need to look at the services that go in it, and the services that are in that community and that place around it. You know, we see a lot of large schemes in London, not wishing to name names, that have kind of been overdeveloped, created a bubble within themselves, and those are the places where, yes, you might have made a lot of money on the way up, but they also fall off a cliff quite quickly as well, as people realise that the basic fundamentals of a place to live just aren't there. So alongside the location, the community, I think looking at the backer of who's developing these properties, if they're in it for the long term, that's a good investment for you as well, if you're in it for the long term alongside them. So people who are kind of in and out developers, I think it's much more difficult to predict what those properties are going to be like for the long term.
Yeah, follow the transport links and follow the river where we are right now. I mean, when I was a boy, this place was light industrial and wasn't really a place to do what we're doing right now. Charlton Riverside is next door to us. It's all light industrial. It's exactly what was here when I was a boy. That's now being regenerated and it's starting. And then you've got obviously Woolwich, the next stop down the road. And what's happening down there, Crossrail is going in there, Abbey Wood as well. Historically, who'd heard of Abbey Wood? No one. Crossrail is coming, we think, soon. But if you are going to follow, you know, investment in property, transport and infrastructure, as Philip rightly said, are key. And would I live there? Yes, I would. Then sure. A river view, why not? All over the world, you know, properties built around rivers and nice views, residential in particular. So follow the transport, follow the water.
Follow the economics and follow the common sense as well, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, and what separates Greenwich Peninsula, for example, from other developments is the fact that Night Dragon have control of the end user. They're trying to build an identity in the area. So you're not investing in, in a tower or in a development where the developer's sole vested interest is to just shift units. I mean, you're investing in the future of the area. And that's one of the unique USPs that we communicate to our buyers when we want to bring anyone over to Greenwich Peninsula. Surprisingly, it's 15 minutes on the Jubilee line, and we haven't even started speaking about Crossrail when that kicks in. So you are connected to as central as London gets with Green Park.
Okay. And so we've kind of talked about regeneration so far and new builds. What about the second-hand market? Is there kind of interest or scope in that?
Well, I do it all day, every day. So we call it standing stock. We've been selling, residential investment property all over the UK for many, many, many years. And we've got heaps of money chasing income in particular. And you get, obviously, lower property, lower capital values all over, outside of London, get higher yields. You don't get the capital growth story, but you do get some rental growth. And it's, as always, a safe haven, as safe as houses, as it were, place to put your money. So, obviously capital growth is what drives a lot of investment in residential in particular. Some would argue that we've hit a bit of a ceiling there in certain areas, certainly down here, but there is still a bit of ripple further up the country, and with that comes some yield as well. So, why not invest up there? And as I said earlier, we've got American funds chasing Australian and Far Eastern money. And it's not lost on them that they get good income returns on residential in places like Stockton-on-Tees and Manchester and places you've never heard of, but the returns are there. It just
I
doesn't
live near Stockton-on-Tees.
there you go. So, but you don't necessarily get the capital growth on the bricks and mortar, but it has its attraction, obviously.
I think investors have got to be realistic as well. I mean, I think the days of double-digit annual capital growth of property is gone.
Mm-hmm.
We've lived through unprecedented times, the last 10, 15 years, massively low interest rates, and that source of equity into the market through, bank and mum and dad and things like that is slowly drying up. The households have gone from one person to two persons earning wealth. We've seen the end of that, basically. You can only have so many people in a household working. People are getting older, people are trying to preserve their capital for longer, to fund their retirements and things like that, rather than passing it down to children and having that bubble, of getting capital into new purchases, as young as we have been. So I think those days of double-digit growth are gone, and I think the underlying economics of where that growth came from has dried up. That's not to say we won't see capital growth going forward, because there's still very strong other economic factors to it. But I think investors have got to be realistic. If you want to put money into any market, any residential property market at the moment, to then look forward and go, you're going to get a 10% return over this over the next couple of years, that's not going to happen in my view.
Anyone want to add to that, or?
I think I would wholeheartedly agree. Also, I think one of the biggest impacts that's affected the market is stamp duty. When I went into the industry, stamp duty is at 1%. It didn't really impact people. Now, if you've got a second home or if you're overseas, you are still going to be liable for that extra 3%. So you've got up to 15% stamp. That's have a big impact. So again, if you're looking at double-digit increase, you've got to take stamp duty into account.
Okay. So we've kind of spoken about what areas and opportunities of the market are kind of rife for investment or not. What actual geographical areas of London are attracting global investment?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
Specifically speaking about the Middle East market, which I primarily focus on, if you were to plot a map of where the investment was 10 or 15 years ago, I would say over 90% would be within the city of Westminster and RBKC, taking into consideration the fantastic transport links, everyone using Uber these days, and the value for money play going outside of prime central London and the peripheries. We're starting to see a demand in the regeneration areas. Two notable examples are obviously Apple committing 50% of the commercial space in Battersea Power Station, over 500,000 square feet, which was actually announced after the referendum. So Brexit had no impact on that decision. The US Embassy moving from debatably one of the most prestigious addresses in the world in Grosvenor Square and relocating to 9 Elms. That's another decision by two global powerhouses who make calculated decisions. So yes, there is an appetite to move around prime central London and the peripheries.
What about further out than prime central London, zone 2 to 5 maybe?
I think anywhere where there's a regeneration story, that attracts money. But I think there is a strong argument that central London has bottomed out, and we've definitely got people that are asking and would like to buy in and around central London blocks, significant chunks of property if they can. So, that money is definitely back, and there's obviously a currency play which colleagues probably know more about than I do. But anywhere where there's a regeneration story, in Barking Riverside, and as I mentioned, the rivers earlier, and Charlton, and further on down the river, I think maybe on down to Belvedere and to North Kent in the future. But I'm sure those areas must be appealing and on a lot of radars.
Okay. And then, apart from location, position in the market, and type of property, are there any other kind of, soft factors that people are looking for or that people are investing in? Lifestyle, culture, place, having a fantastic, raised garden outside, are things like that do they play an important role when it comes to people investing in London?
I think from a build-to-rent perspective, all the things that go with those 200, 300, 400 block schemes, the Granger Trusts of this world, they're very focused on the bits and pieces that go with those blocks. So is it a dog grooming parlour or a hairdressers, which not that appealing to me, but a gym and Amazon delivery person, who a concierge. All of those factors I think are very, very important, and I think health and lifestyle are becoming much more important to certainly at generation rent. After university up to maybe mid-30s, where historically, in their 20s, people, when I was younger, people were buying houses when they were in their early 20s. I think that's gone back now to 30s. So there's a gap who are renting, and I think that lifestyle scenario, whether you're renting in a vast build-to-rent scheme or a small block of flats anywhere in and around London and the UK, is hugely important.
My view is it's the most important thing into making any investment decision. If you're buying any property in central London, looking at the surrounding areas, looking at the services that area provides, the place, as someone said earlier, you can't walk out your front door and buy a pint of milk or go and have a beer or a glass of Perrier-Jouet or whatever it might be, is critically important. The days of investors coming in on a pure capital play basis, if you're in the build-to-rent market, I think have gone. I think people realise that. So then you've got to look at the yield play, you've got to look at the income. And there is so much choice of where people can live in London now. Renters who provide you the income, look at those locations and look at the services and look at the community around it. We're very lucky here on the peninsula to have the backer that we have. We've invested over £1 billion in building buildings, but we've invested almost exactly the same amount in providing social infrastructure to those buildings. And I think the two have to go hand in hand to attract the market and create that sense of place.
Also, I would add, I think the other big thing is quality. When I went into agency many, many years ago, most of the bathrooms had carpet. You didn't have a shower, you had a handheld shower. Fast forward now, nobody would even dream of not having a shower in a bathroom. It's quality. People expect much better quality. And whether you are renting, whether you are buying, buyers are much more discerning. So they want to see quality. So things like good flooring, good bathrooms, good kitchens. Doesn't have to be big, but it just has to be functional. And I think crucially, if you're buying new build, one of the things is to actually look at the building and say to yourself, in 10 years' time, will this be an attractive building? Because when you look at buildings which were built in the 60s and 70s, they have dated. Nobody wants to buy them. From an investment point of view, not a good investment. And a lot of the developments which were done in the 80s, the quality wasn't there. They haven't lasted. So actually they are, from a long-term investment, weak. So again, always look at the building and look at the design qualities. If it's a pretty building, great views, good long-term play.
Yeah, okay, solid advice. And Mohammed, from the Middle East, do you find that your buyers are asking for these things?
Absolutely. It's a case-by-case basis, but location is key, regardless of what demographic is investing. Access to transport links. If it's a buy-to-let, you want to be close to universities. So exactly, with all, touching on all the points that were mentioned, it's also important to have an agent that you can trust, to have that interpersonal relationship with the agents too. And me being one is not rocket science. Know your market, know your stock, do your due diligence, and try and show buyers as much stock as possible, so that once they're ready to make a decision, it's a well-informed decision. The product will speak for itself. We're not here to sell the bathroom or sell the joinery. You're just here to help with and act more as an advisor than a reactive broker.
And on a kind of separate note, there's obviously lots of agents in the UK and in London in particular. How would you advise people here who are looking to invest in London, they can decide on and find a good agent?
It's similar to you instructing a solicitor or any professional within any field. It's a relationship. Speak to as many agents as you can. Go with whoever you feel comfortable with. Go with someone that's always available to assist, and that's looking after your vested interest. Anyone can find good from great based on a couple weeks relationship or whatever the tenure of that relationship is. It shouldn't feel artificial. Once you're comfortable with a professional in any industry, that's who you should go with. Okay.
And the last question on the panel is, what does the future hold for the London property market? So a very broad, very open question. I see your faces. Who wants to start this one off? Open-ending question.
I think it's a very bright future, personally. I mean, the fundamentals around residential property in particular don't change. Population is getting bigger, living longer. We need houses and flats for people to live in. We need to keep building them. We need to have the infrastructure that goes with it. The focus on retirement, I think, is hugely important going forward. That's my investment tip. I don't think there's anywhere near enough good quality retirement stock out there. I dread to think, where some of us will end up at some point in the future, because, well, what do we all think of care homes? Generally, it's pretty unpleasant, stale environment. So there's a big angle there with retirement villages and care going forward. But I think generally the fundamentals around residential are hugely positive long term, as they always have been. It's a hedge against inflation, safe as houses, as I said earlier. London remains one of the premier cities in the world, if not the premier city in the world that people want to be in, and that judicial system that was mentioned earlier is very, very important to international investors as much as domestic ones. So it's a good place to be. No matter what time you invest your money, the future's bright, my humble opinion.
Okay.
I would concur. I think London is very resilient. I would also add, I think care homes, if you look at the volume of care homes in America versus England, I think we haven't even touched the surface. There was a very good cushion I saw on a sofa the other day. It said, "Be nice to your kids, they decide your care home." And it's crucial. We have very weak care homes. We haven't even touched that surface. We're all getting older, and that is an area that I think that is a growth industry.
Okay. I think that's right. Looking at those other kind of, quite not sure the word, but those other residential sectors, be it co-living, student accommodation, all the way through to care homes, I think looking at the underlying economic dynamics of what makes people occupy property is absolutely the key thing. I think looking back over 10, 20-year trends is a complete waste of time. Markets are fundamentally changing. And I think you've got to look at those fundamentals of what makes people want to buy or occupy buildings and follow that trend. And the only other thing is beware of the bubbles. Don't follow the crowd. You only have to look at some of the schemes around London. You need to look at the WeWork situation at the moment. There's a lot of hype that gets behind some markets, and if you don't have the underlying fundamentals of why people occupy properties, I think that's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mohammed?
Absolutely, I completely agree. In fact, I don't even think the prospects of London's property market would even be a question if it wasn't for the current situation, or if it wasn't for the B word. It's worth noting that where we are right now with Brexit, we haven't seen anything like this since World War II. I still strongly believe that it's a hurdle we will definitely overcome. The fundamentals will remain strong for London, and it will continue to be one of the most, if not most desirable city to live and invest in. Property aside, an article came out about London being the #1 city for fintech, surpassing New York and San Francisco just a couple of days ago. So I am overly optimistic about the prospects of London for the many years to come.
Okay, fantastic. So that covers all the questions that we have for tonight. Can we have a round of applause, please, for the panelists? We have a Q&A now. So who wants to be brave and put their hand up and ask the first question? Oh, there we go.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your participation. It's quite a nice global view that you've given. Given the current circumstances in the global stage, the world stage, do you think that the current situation has really affected London or the UK in the world, in the eyes of the world, in general, in terms of investment and income?
I personally don't. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing money coming in, and people see opportunity where there's uncertainty. So, if you've got money to deploy safely, England or the UK is still a safe place to put money, certainly into residential. People need to rent property that derives income. You've got money to deploy, whether you're American or Indian. London and England generally is a safe place to put that money. So I suppose, yes, obviously there's some turmoil, but it's not going to go on forever. And where there's turmoil, there's opportunity, and I think that's recognised.
Anybody else have a different view?
I think all markets, all economies have up cycles and down cycles, be those driven by economics, be those driven by politics, and anything in between, to be perfectly honest. So yes, it has impacted the London market. That would be silly to say it hasn't impacted the London market. As you say, the underlying fundamentals of most of the world cities, be they governed by, Mr. Trump or, here, Mr. Johnson, whether you love them or loathe these people, the underlying dynamics of these economies are always going to be there. So they should come back.
Cool. Yep.
Thank you. Earlier on, I was asking Tony on the boat about care homes, and funny enough, you guys have mentioned care homes. We're in the retirement space ourselves. Slightly disagree. There are plenty of great care operators now, unlike a few years ago, that are really doing a fabulous job of creating care homes that are homely but like luxury hotels, and we're in that space too. So the question I wanted to ask you was around how are we going to, first of all, find the will of planners to grant planning permission, because I know some of my competitors have tried to get consent, and in terms of what do you see as the kind of optimum type of care home with kind of the assisted living model? Do you think there'll be mixed type schemes where you've got care homes and assisted living and retail all combined in high rise? What's your thoughts around the kind of spaces that older people want to live in the future in London? Because it'll be different to in the suburbs.
Yeah, it's a market I'd love to know more about. It's not a market we're in at Allsops, but it fascinates me, and I'm interested to talk to you more about it. But I can see it sort of that build to rent model, which is bespoke design for that generation rent that I talked about. I would have thought that some sort of model that is slightly reflective of that going forward, where there's a mix of ages, maybe not just everybody over the age of 55 has to live there. It would be nice if it was more integrated with, a more vibrant setup. Some luxury, some less luxury, and a nice combination thereof with retail and gyms and dog grooming parlours, I guess. I mean, perhaps that's the future, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, I really do. And you're probably addressing it far better than I am.
I think it's in its infancy. I live very close to the King's Road. There is a development by there called Orions. That model was very luxury, high-end retirement, and it was looking at selling. They've changed their business model, and they're now looking at renting. So I think there's a demand for very high-end luxury retirement homes. Whether it is a rental model or a sales model, I think there's probably room for both. But I do think there's, going forward, does one want to go into an apartment building only fit for people over 60 years old? Because a lot of people who are 60 are very young. They're going to live another 30 years, 40 years. And do you suddenly want to be said, look, actually, we're going to shove you in there? So maybe, I think it needs to be looked at. It needs to be evaluated. It needs to be, there needs to be a blended mix. But I think it falls back on the service. 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have things like Uber. If you wanted to get a taxi, you get an app. If you want a meal for the evening, you get it on an app. The service that we now expect is revolutionized. And I think, again, going back to an earlier point my colleague said, is that maybe we need to not look at how people live in properties the last 24 years, 20, 30 years, is actually how people are going to interact with living in properties the next 20, 30 years. I mean, 30 years ago, none of us had phones or these bloody great bricks. Going forwards, I think we will have to evaluate how we are going to live, not look back.
Thanks, panel. More of a development question, really. It's all about viability. Land aspirations for vendors, always up here. Reality is probably somewhere down here. Planning, obviously. But then post-Grenfell, the tragedy there, and the squeeze on, and the increase on expectations of build quality, and developers wanting 25% margins, with the squeeze on build costs, sales values, the double-digit increases have long gone. So the viability and the margins are just being squeezed. So why, if you were a residential developer for sale, why would you bother going forward?
Yeah, well, you probably wouldn't. I think everything you said is very eloquent and is absolutely spot on. I mean, the current market, land values are too high, build costs are too high. End prices are coming down or coming off. It's not particularly viable. But then that's when you start looking at the alternatives, and maybe you should be talking to him. He's got some good ideas and he's got a good model. But something has to give, and that is ultimately the price at ground level, as it were. And that will give, because it'll have to. There's pressure on people to move on. Planning permissions are only live for a certain amount of time. If you can't build it, you've got to sell it. If you don't want to sell it for the price that you paid, the bank will force you to sell it. So, most of us have probably been here before. I sense, there are some cracks appearing in the dam. I don't expect it to burst, but I do feel that, there are some fundamental issues short term. But ultimately, the fundamentals around residential are very good. It's just that, as you rightly said, build costs are very high, land prices are too high. The vendor thinks his piece of land is the best bit of land, and so on and so forth. But I think you've got to look outside the box. Maybe residential block of flats isn't the way forward. Maybe it's a stunning care home. Maybe it's a build-to-rent model. I mean, you could build, rent, and hold, but the planning system is a major concern, and you mentioned it as well. It's everybody's biggest headache, and I know a lot of you in this room, and I've recognised a lot of faces, know far more about it than I do, but something needs to be done, because as far as I can tell, every time you ring up the planning office, it's a different person there. So how can that help us going forward as a collective? It's if you're Tony Pidgley, it's not so hard, maybe.
I'm just going to ask, what does Tony Pidgley know that we don't? Because he's still acquiring land, and big chunks of land in London.
Well, I guess it's pretty handy when you get gifted land and told to regenerate it. But yeah, I mean, he's got the brand, so maybe that's the key. You know, this is a phenomenal brand here. You know, so and quality, as rightly said. If you build the right thing, build it and they will come, I suppose. But planning is a major problem for the small developers, and that's actually what I think is massively missing from the market. You know, it's dominated now by
the big
quite a small number of very big players. But we need the smaller guys, like a lot of you here, pardon the expression, to be cracking on, and it's very, very difficult for you.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know, Tony's got a fantastic business model. You know, no one can fault that, as you can attest by his annual bonus. But you know, he has got a product that he produces that everyone knows, everybody trusts, and he's built that up over a long period of time. If you buy a Berkeley home, you know you're going to get quality. And you know, speaking to your point earlier, you know the product that you're getting. I think the opportunity for others in that sector is on the construction methodology. You know, generally we still build buildings like we've been building them for 200 years. It's utter nonsense. You know, to accept a building, you know, to accept a flat at practical completion from a builder with 50 snags in it for the biggest investment that you're ever going to make is absolutely crazy. You know, would you buy a car with 50 snags in it? No. So why do you buy an apartment for £500,000 or whatever it is with 50 problems in it? So I think the construction methodology has got to change, and I think that's an emphasis on all developers, you know, from the little ones to the big ones to Berkeley Homes. You've seen Berkeley, you know, investing massively in modular technology to cut out, a lot of the time in the build process, but cut out a lot of the problems in the build process as well. The planning, I mean, we talk about planning the whole day. There's nothing you can do. You've got to work within the systems, basically. But looking at the quality, the build, and looking at alternative sectors. You know, not everyone can produce a Berkeley flat, but you can do a care home, you can do co-living, you can do all these different types of product and tap into different markets.
We've got time for a few more questions.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to ask a question. You've been very focused on getting funding and people investing in London from obviously India, Dubai, everything else. What are the British people like us doing with their money at the moment? Are they investing it or are they keeping hold of it?
I would argue that we still love property. It's one of the strangest things where you go to a dinner party or go to a drinks party and somebody will say with great pride what they bought their property for. They won't tell you what their bonus is, they won't tell you what their salary is, but we love talking about property. I said, I think the fundamentals are still, we love buying property. To misquote Napoleon, he said we were a nation of shopkeepers. We were a nation of estate agents. We love real estate. I think the only concern that going forward, I think the days of people in their 20s and maybe early 30s being able to buy, fast forward, I think we will now have a new generation who will be priced out of the market, a generation rent. In Europe, it's much more common for people to rent, but I think a lot of people, to get on the property ladder, one talks about buying a 1 or 2 bedroom unit for 500,000. It's a lot of money, a tremendous sum of money to put down. Okay, interest rates are low, but it's still a huge amount of money. You know, when I arrived in London, you could buy a property for 20, 30,000. It would be a 4-bedroom house. You can't do that now.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the trick to this, you're absolutely right. You know, the days of being able to walk out of university and afford your own flat is getting more and more difficult, certainly in London. I think there is a big opportunity to create different types of investment product for people wanting to invest in property. You know, blockchain and the derivative market within property, direct property development is coming. I'm sure it'll be here very shortly, to give people the opportunity to get exposure to the property market, but not necessarily through direct ownership. And that, to me, will open up a vast market within London and indeed across the world. People wanting to get exposure to the property market, but not having £100,000 or whatever it is from mum and dad or a bonus or whatever, because that is more difficult.
And the vast majority of business that we do at Allsops is UK-based investors and developers buying UK property. Probably 98% of the business we do is UK money.
So what you're saying is that we should create something like a housing association, but for a private sector, where you have 30% ownership or 20% ownership, and then you become a private investor.
Well, there are fractional ownership models out there. We've done business with several. So you can put, whether it's £500 or 5,000 or 25,000, you can buy a percentage of a flat or a house anywhere in the UK, and that gives you a bit of a return. So that is readily available out there, and we've sold blocks of flats and portfolios of property to those type of models which are out there. So, but I do think fractional ownership, as in shared ownership, is a great model as well. Because as Collie rightly said, we still love property in the UK, and we are demented about owning our own. Englishman's home is his castle, or part of a castle. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else got time for one more question? Okay.
Mine's quite a light question, guys, because it's been a bit intense, hasn't it? Other than Greenwich Peninsula, obviously, what are the other hot areas to invest in at the moment?
I said follow Crossrail, and I still think that you follow the river, Charlton Riverside, Woolwich, Abbey Wood in particular. I'm a Greenwich resident, so I'm very biased. So take that pinch of salt. But I think Crossrail obviously goes out the other side as well, out to Slough and Southall and all the way out there. When it finally kicks off, we will definitely get a bump and a feel-good factor, in my humble opinion.
At Sotheby's, we've had success with a development in Covent Garden, which is owned by Capco, who are the developer and are basically putting their imprint on Covent Garden. 15 years ago, Covent Garden was a tourist trap. Right now you have brands like Cartier and Hermes outbidding each other for flagship locations. So similar to the concept of what Night Dragon are doing, where you have control of an area as opposed to just vested interest in one development. I would say that.
Cool. So thank you very much to the panelists once again.